been very much a global phenomenon, and so it seems like a lot was left out.
Yeah, thanks very much. Let me respond briefly to that. And actually recommended Calamar's interview. He does deal with, in fact, by the way, there are many counterparts of Fannie and Freddie in many parts of the world. So obviously I have to dissent from your view that other parts of the world where there were some housing bubbles did not have government intervention in housing. Government intervention is pretty ubiquitous, and the counterparts of Fannie and Freddie really were present. Calamar's actually covers the international question pretty well and points out that you find pretty much the same sickness. But when you speak in terms of debt cycles and all that stuff, I'm not clear on the abstraction that you're using. You do acknowledge, I take it, that the behavior of bankers in a free market would normally be to be conservative in terms of profits and lending. Do you not? And you do then agree that all of the world has central banks who are also pretty much pursuing similar destructive interest rate policies. I did not, as you know, say that it was only Fannie and Freddie. It was very substantially underwritten by the most powerful central bank of the world, our Federal Reserve, and other central banks were to some degree pursuing that as well. So I would dissent from two strands. I would say that in fact you can verify this story on the contrary by looking abroad. You'll find similar kinds of interventions, both by the central bank and by housing policies. Apart from the fact that if you think about it and try to remember what capitalism is, rather than the capitalism of debt cycles and all the rest, then you'll recognize the banker we love to hate would not have allowed this.
I guess where I'm coming from is when we're talking about the debt super cycles, is if you look at plots of the buildup of total outstanding credit for various sources over the last 30 or 40 years, you can see that it's kind of built up. And I think while we were in an asset bubble, lenders were much more tolerant. And as soon as for whatever reason, something caused the actual inflation to stop, all of a sudden the music stopped and there weren't enough shares. And so that's kind of what I'm saying.
Well, I will agree with you to this extent. You're absolutely right. Again, we live in a corrupt capital system. We live in a system in which I think you're saying, I would translate what you just said into this. There certainly was, on the part of people without judgment, a certain faith in the Greenspan Fed, a certain faith that all would be well, that he would bail you out, that it would all work out. I do think that what you're articulating is just another way of sort of backing into the larger context I'm trying to provide, to try to ask you to consider what is capitalism, what is free market capital. It has to be a mind experiment because we don't have it in this culture. We have a situation in which there's all eyes on the Fed. And by the way, there was very little criticism of Greenspan interest rate policies at the time. He assured us he knew how to deal with bubbles, he knew how to cope. So when you talk about, you build up a debt, and everybody thought the asset inflation would continue or all would be fine. And indeed, that's because it would not run by capitalists. It would run by people who think the Fed will provide. And a great deal of, hopefully, healthy disillusionment is said.
Yeah, I was wondering, come on.
Everybody will have a chance to speak as long as, usually Gene has to go to write his article at the end, but as long as he's still here, everybody will have a chance to speak. So that's our format here. Don't worry. And if he has to go early, then we'll leave in a second.
By the way, I also I forgot to say that my email address is ge10@gmail.com, and that's my special email address to those of you who are here. If you want to write me, first of all, these displays, you get it. If you want to write a question, you get it. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was, excuse my vernacular when I'm describing the situation. My name is Chris Antonini. Yes, I was wondering if the last gentleman, aren't we leaving out the fact, correct me if I'm wrong, that the secondary buying of the mortgages, once Fannie had them, they were based on assumptions like the Bank of Germany, that the return rate, their uncollectible debt would be a certain percentage, it was covered by the spread of the median, and that's what they were buying me for. And then all of a sudden, when the rules on our side had changed, when, for instance, hypothetically, 3% were not being paid, all of a sudden 40% weren't being paid, therefore, the foreign banks had overpaid dramatically for these, drastically for these packages, multi-billion-dollar packages, and that in turn was really what brought in the rest of the world to our, we started.
This is a very technical point, and many of us are not completely as expert in the housing market as we should be. So kindly elaborate on what you just said so that we all can understand it.
Traditionally, after the mortgages are purchased from the bank, so you have more money to loan, the Fannie or the Freddie, secondary mortgage purchasers will sell those in multi-billion-dollar blocks to foreign banks. And the foreign banks, it's like, I'll give you fake numbers, but if it's 8% is the mean of all the billion-dollar mortgage package, maybe the German bank will pay 5% with 3% spread, knowing 1% won't be paid back. Statistically, they won't get that, so we'll still make 2 points. But what I'm saying, all of a sudden, the same loans they had been given based on basic standard principles of lending, all of a sudden, without them knowing it, the returns were no longer 1% not being paid back, it was 10 or 12%. Therefore, they're nowhere near covering the spread, and they were losing. And that's what I was asking, that was really the main, what the last gentleman brought up about the main criteria that made the rest of the world fall.
Well, do you feel that I left that out and you're making that a contribution as more or less a supplement to what I said? No, or do you think it somehow disagrees with what I said?
No, I agree with you. I'm just saying that what he brought up was like, it seemed to me like other banks were doing the same practices we were around the world, and that's why they collapsed. And I'm just saying, I was asking you, wouldn't you say that was a bigger proponent of why the rest of the world collapsed, than even if they were doing the same thing we were doing?
I see. No, I think that's broadly right. I would only, again, emphasize, don't lose sight of the fact that the creditors of Fannie and Freddie are fine. The taxpayer is paying to the tune of hundreds of billions. It's the mortgage holders who got hurt. But indeed, I think that's a supplementary point. Thanks. And we had...
I'm Darren Montgomery. I run the New York Investor Meetup. We have dealt with this issue for...
Say it a little louder and clearer.
Okay, can you hear me? Can I hear you? Very well. Okay, I'm Darren Montgomery. I run the New York Investor Meetup. This is a volunteer group in New York City. We have 3,000 members. We have dealt with this topic for 3 years now. We made a lot of videos on YouTube 2 years ago, including an expose on Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae. And the corruption was incident. It was a 5-part video series, and it touched about some very small percent. And essentially, they were using taxpayer money for political suppression of their enemies. And this is happening right here in the United States. And we mentioned that the subprime mortgages would blow up into a crisis in July 2007. About 2 weeks ago, the stock market started to tank based on this. And I'm also a blogger. I'm the helicopter economics investing guy, and the blogger shares where this information came out first. And even today, it does not appear in most mainstream publications. So if you want the truth, you have to go to bloggers at this point. And on this,
Is this a criticism of...
well, he's an exception, but, you know, he's unique. How many other people do you have that are dealing with this topic? Oh, I agree with 99% of what was said. My disagreement is actually horrible. Things are actually worse. I am coming from the other side.
Give us some chapter and verse.
This is the optimistic view that you're hearing. Also what I'm hearing is there's a lot of the past tense being used. This is not a crisis, it's over. It's not remotely over, it's not nearly over. I'd like to point out that mortgage rates are at a record low now. They are lower than what caused this crisis. The Fed is trying to re-inflate this bubble. It's not like there's enough